To all those people watching, I'd like to remind everyone that this video is not made for kids. It's for older fans and adults. Enjoy the fucking video! Once again, Henry was ill. The workmen were working hard to make him feel better, but couldn't. It was at a bad time too, as it was nearly Christmas, and the railway was going to be very busy pulling passengers and goods, and Topham Hatt was in dire need of a spare engine. "I can help, sir," called Thomas in the shed. The other engines laughed. You'll probably leave another passenger train behind," Gordon chortled. Thomas hissed steam crossly. "He's right, Thomas," replied Topham Hatt. "I know you learned your lesson that day, but I can't afford any more mistakes, especially at Christmas time. Besides, you're needed here for pilot duties." "Yes, sir," grumbled Thomas. So Topham went to his office and had contacted the LMS Railway to see if they could supply a spare engine. Indeed they did, and it was not just any spare engine, but one that was an old friend of Thomas and Edward's. His name was Albert. He was a smart red tank engine who had come from the same line as Edward on the mainland, the Furness Railway. He came to the island many years ago to help build the Northwestern Railway with the two engines. He also had two blue and white coaches named Victoria and Helena, and they loved travelling with him up and down the line delivering passengers. Although Thomas liked Albert, he was cross. "I can't help on the railway, but Albert, another tank engine? Rubbish! Albert may be another tank engine, Thomas, but he's a bit wiser than you," replied Edward thoughtfully. "Wiser? You heard about that snow incident he was part of last year, Edward? I know. And I know that the fact director understands that you learned your lesson about leaving Henry's coaches behind, but this is the busiest time of year for the railway, and the fact director can't have someone over-eager as you to mess up the timetable. He knows, and I know, you are really useful, Thomas, but he needs someone like Albert to help keep things running smoothly." If you ever visit the island of Sodor and are interested in the stories from the various railways, then you should visit the Railway Archives. It's a treasure trove of stories over the years with all of the engines across the island of Sodor, big or small. Let's take a look at all the stories that are a blast from the past for the engines of Sodor. Albert used to work on a branch line that ran between Lakeside to Windermere, and on that line there were two tunnels located at Hatherwaite. Albert thought he was good in snow, until a mound crashed down on him after he blew steam at the tunnel mouth. Poor Albert had to spend the night in the freezing cold, and ever since that day he had developed a fear for snow. But Thomas thought he was being very silly. "Come on, Albert, it's only snow." "To you it is, Thomas," replied Albert. "But you work in the station yard, shunting trucks and coaches. You don't deal with any snowdrift." "Pah!" scoffed Thomas. "It's just a mound of white fluff. If I was dealing with such, I would just push it aside. Anyway, I can't waste my time with some scaredy tank engine. I got things to shunt." And he grouched away. Albert just scoffed. "Pay no mind to him, Albert." And Edward told Albert about Thomas feeling annoyed that he couldn't help out on the main line. That young engine will get his turn one day. You were right, though, when it comes to snowdrifts. But there's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to snow in general." "Well, how can one not be afraid of it, Edward?" asked Albert. "Well, my driver had fitted me with a snowplow. It helps to clear the snow." "A snowplow? I've heard of those things, but I never had actually worn one on the LMS." "Well, it helps. Better ask the driver to see if one can fit on you." So he did, and when he was fitted with a snowplow, he puffed into the station collecting his two coaches that Thomas had shunted. Thomas could see the snowplow on him. "Why are you wearing that thing?" Then Albert explained what Edward had said to him. Then Thomas had an idea. "But I've been told that those things don't work in snow," he said cheekily. Albert looked at Thomas worriedly. "You think so?" "Oh yes. An engine came to our line a few years before you came, and they got stuck in a huge mound on the main line with one. Now Albert was having second thoughts, but before he could say anything, the guard blew his whistle and waved his green flag. Albert puffed worriedly away, while Thomas laughed that his plan had worked. He'll have doubts and the fact director will send him away for sure and will ask me to help. Albert puffed down the line with his passengers, pushing bounds of snow aside. They were little drifts, of course, and he could see the snowplough's use, but he was still worried over what Thomas had said. Then he came to a drift that was larger than most. Albert was scared. "It's okay, Albert. We'll charge through. Don't worry." But as they came nearer and nearer to the drift, he shut his eyes, and then Albert opened his eyes and saw that he was still puffing. "What the? Where's the snow?" "You burst through it, old boy. Well done," congratulated the fireman happily. Albert was pleased, and now he doesn't feel scared anymore. When he arrived back at the main station, he began telling everyone about his splendid journey and how he dealt with snow. Everyone was pleased, all except Thomas. "Puh," he sniffed as he saw the other engines praising Albert. The next few days, Albert was still praising his snowplow, and Thomas was fed up with him even more. When night came, it began to snow heavily again, and the island was covered in more drifts. Edward and Albert got up early to plough the snow off the track to clear paths for the other engines. Later that day, as more paths were cleared, Thomas was in the station yard shunting trucks and coaches from one siding to another. Just then, Edward puffed in fast, whistling to Thomas to get his attention. "What's the matter, Edward?" There's been a snowdrift down the line while I was making my way back here. Have you seen Albert?" Then Thomas had another naughty idea. "All right, Edward, I'll tell him as soon as he gets here." Edward smiled. "Thank you, Thomas," and he puffed away to collect some trucks. Later, Albert steamed into the station, ready to start his first train for the day. "Hello, Thomas. Edward told me that you got something important you want to tell me. What was it?" This is where Thomas put his plan into action. "What? Important? I didn't even see Edward, Albert." "Oh, strange. Well, thank you, Thomas. I guess." Albert puffed down the line feeling confident. But just as he saw the snowdrift that Edward had asked Thomas to warn Albert about, Albert gasped. It was bigger than usual. "We better stop," shouted the driver, and he applied the brakes. But the rails were slippery. They charged through the snow and were stuck tight. "Oh, no," sighed Albert sadly. Just then, Edward was near the drift and saw Albert. "Albert, are you all right?" I'm fine, Edward," shivered Albert. "Didn't Thomas warn you about the snowdrift? But he told me that he didn't see you." Edward was shocked, and then he was cross. "I better go and give Thomas a word." "Don't worry, Albert, I'll call for help." And coupled to his coaches, he chuffed quickly away. Thomas was happily dozing in a siding after his shunting. "Oh, Edward, it's you," yawned Thomas. "Yes," replied Edward scornfully, "and I want to know why you didn't give Albert my warning." "Who?" "Albert!" And he hissed steam loudly and angrily at Thomas. Thomas was frightened. He had never seen Edward this cross before. There was a heavy drift of snow blocking his path, and now he's stuck. Luckily I was there before it could have gotten worse for his passengers. but he's now stuck in the middle of the line, waiting to be pulled out, and it's all because of you being jealous that he was chosen to help instead of you. Now Thomas felt bad for what he had done. I'm sorry, Edward. I was jealous.
There's never a time to worry about your own ego, Thomas, replied a well-known voice. Go and collect the workmen, and help Albert at once.
Yes, sir, replied a meek-sounding Thomas, and he puffed away. They arrived at Albert's snowdrift, and after the workmen dug him out, Thomas took Albert back to the big station. Not a single word from one of them came out of their mouths. When they arrived back at the big station, Albert broke the ice.
There was something important, wasn't there, Thomas?
I know, and I felt very silly for what I've done to you and your passengers. Ever since the fat director chose you to help, I grew jealous because I really want to go out of this yard and see more of the island.
I can see your woes, Thomas, but that doesn't mean you should lie. You weren't like this when you were building the railway. He's right, Thomas. You won't be helping with trains on the railway for the time being until I could trust you. You are a really useful engine, Thomas, but useful engines shouldn't be rude or terrible to other engines. So, you'll be doing pilot duties for now.
Yes, sir. I will, sir.
And if you plan on being cheeky again, little Thomas, said the fat director crossly, there will be some consequences.
Yes, sir. After that, Albert's confidence in Snow hadn't waned after his accident, and Thomas had stopped becoming jealous of Albert and was back on friendly terms with him. He went home after Henry was repaired. But Thomas still thought that Snow was silly soft stuff. But in time, he will soon learn.
Cinders and ashes, I'm stuck!